Orion Langston slammed the door of his matte black Range Rover, the tires crunching against the gravel of the narrow country road, his face set in a scowl that didn't quite match the quiet beauty of the hills around him. He was done. Done with New York, with boardrooms, with fake smiles, with the constant grind. The million-dollar deals, the penthouse meetings, the endless expectations, none of it meant anything anymore, not after what happened with his father. Not after the last board vote that nearly cost him everything. His assistant had tried to talk him out of it. Take a week, go to St. Bart's, not. Whatever this is. This, Orion had snapped, is peace. What he didn't expect when he booked a 6-month rental of a countryside estate in Vermont was the old stone cottage sitting at the edge of the property, barely visible through the trees, with smoke curling from its chimney like something out of a fairy tale. He didn't expect her either. Hey, a woman's voice called as he walked toward the cottage, drawn by the smell of something warm and sweet in the air. You're on private land, Orion turned and froze. She stood barefoot in the grass, jeans cuffed at the ankle, a white linen shirt tied at the waist, and an old gardening hat pushed up to reveal the most startling green eyes he'd ever seen. I'm Orion Langston, he said after a pause, offering a hand. I rented the main house. Didn't mean to trespass. She eyed him like he might be lying. Jessa Vance, I live here, I own the cottage. You live on the estate, she folded her arms. My grandmother sold the big house to some real estate firm years ago but kept the cottage. I inherited it. I grow herbs, flowers. Sell soaps at the town co-op. It's quiet. I like it that way. She didn't smile. She didn't offer him tea. She didn't even ask what someone dressed in designer jeans and Italian boots was doing wandering into her garden, and for some reason, Orion couldn't stop thinking about her all night. The next morning, he caught sight of her again kneeling in the soil, hands covered in dirt, humming softly. She didn't look up. But when he brought her a coffee from the only cafe in town later that week, she took it without saying thank you. You don't talk much, he said. I talk. Just not to people who think the world owes them something because they wear a watch that costs more than my car. He laughed once, surprised she noticed. You looked, she gave him a look. It's hard to miss when it catches the sun like a disco ball. He came back the next day, and the next. He helped her carry boxes to her car. She let him sit on her porch once while she labeled jars. He asked about the lavender soap. She said it helped with sleep. He bought 5. I don't sleep much, he said casually. Maybe you should try doing something real with your hands. Might help, she replied, not looking up from her work. One afternoon, a storm rolled in. His power went out. He made his way through the rain, knocking on her door like a wet dog. Power's down, he said, soaked to the bone. She stared at him for a second, then stepped aside. Don't drip on the rug, he didn't. He stood awkwardly in her kitchen while she brewed tea, barefoot again, wrapped in a sweater that hung off one shoulder. This place is cozy, he said, glancing around. The ceilings were low. The walls were lined with books. A cat blinked at him from the armchair. You don't like it, she said flatly. No, I do. It feels real. She handed him a mug. Their fingers brushed. He noticed the way her eyes lingered for just a second too long. You've got city all over you, she murmured. I'm trying to wash it off. Jessa didn't ask more, but she let him stay through the storm. They played cards. She made soup. He told her about his mother, how she taught him to play piano, how she died when he was 14. She told him about her gran, how she planted every inch of the garden outside by hand. When the storm cleared, neither of them moved. I should go, he said. You should, she agreed, but didn't open the door. He didn't go. After that, things shifted. Orion found excuses to walk past her fence. Jessa started leaving the gate open. He brought her lunch from the bistro in town. She called him out for trying to impress her and still ate every bite. One evening, she offered him a beer on her porch. He took it. They sat in silence. You never told me what you do, she finally said. I'm in finance, he said vaguely. She raised an eyebrow. That watch says you're not just in it. That's a millionaire's watch, he laughed. Am I that obvious? Yes, he looked at her, really looked. Does that bother you? Jessa took a long sip from her bottle. Only if you expect it to mean something. I don't. Then we're fine. But the truth was, it did mean something. He had money, a lot of it. And for the first time in years, it didn't feel like the most important thing in the room. She teased him, challenged him, made him feel like a man, not a brand. And one night, when the stars were out and the air smelled like rosemary from her garden, she kissed him first. It was sudden, soft, and over too fast. Orion blinked. "What was that for?" "I just wanted to know what you'd do." He leaned in, cupped her cheek. "This." And when he kissed her back, it wasn't soft. It was months of tension, of quiet looks, of hands brushing too long. It was every unspoken word, and every night he thought of her when he couldn't sleep. When they finally pulled apart, Jessa whispered, "I still don't care how much money you have." "That's good," he said, breathless, "because I think I'm falling in love with you anyway." Jessa didn't let her lips linger once they parted. She stepped back onto the porch's creaking board like it hadn't happened, like her heart hadn't just rattled beneath her ribs. Orion's hand was still half raised, fingers tingling with the warmth of her jaw. "You should go before the night fog settles," she said, brushing her thumb over her bottom lip like she could erase the moment. "I'm not afraid of fog," he said, voice low. "It creeps in fast here, makes it hard to see where you're going." He didn't move, neither did she. Lightning bugs blinked in the grass, and somewhere deep in the woods, a lone coyote howled. "You always talk in riddles when you're uncomfortable," he asked. "You kiss people after 2 months of silence and soup," he laughed, but it wasn't mocking. "You kissed me." "Exactly." She turned toward the door. "And now I'm going to bed. Will you regret it?" She stopped with her hand on the doorknob. "Only if you ask me that again." The door closed, not slammed, but with the kind of finality that lingered like fog in the lungs. The next morning, Orion didn't walk past her garden. He drove into town instead, needing air that didn't smell like rosemary and regret. He bought a newspaper he didn't read, sat on a park bench near the bakery, and watched a golden retriever try to steal a baguette from a toddler. He thought about Jessa's hands, not their softness, but the way they trembled when she kissed him. Like she hadn't done it in years, like it mattered more than she'd admit. Later, he helped an elderly man lift lumber into a pickup outside the hardware store. The man introduced himself as Tom and asked why he looked like a Wall Street divorcee on sabbatical. Orion told him he was taking time to rethink things. Tom grunted. "You'll find the answers in the dirt, not in your head. Get your hands in some soil." Orion didn't know if it was wisdom or Vermont nonsense, but the next day he knocked on Jessa's cottage door just after sunrise, holding a battered pair of gardening gloves. She opened it in silence. "Teach me," he said. "Teach you what?" "Whatever it is you do out here. You said I needed something real. I'm ready." She didn't invite him in. She walked past him, barefoot again, heading toward the small greenhouse behind the cottage. He followed. That morning he learned the difference between tarragon and thyme, how to thin seedlings without killing them, and that Jessa hummed under her breath when she concentrated. By noon, his knees ached and his back protested, but he hadn't thought about stock prices or mergers once. "You're not terrible," she said, wiping sweat from her brow with her wrist, "but you baby the mint too much." "I didn't know mint had feelings." "It doesn't, but you do, and you're projecting." He glanced at her, sun catching in the strands of hair that had slipped from her braid. "Do you do this with everyone who kisses you? Make them weed your garden?" Jessa leaned on the wooden rake. "Only the ones who look like they've never had dirt under their nails." "I haven't, until today." She tossed him a bottle of water. "Then consider this your baptism." Over the next week, he returned every morning. She handed him a list of tasks without preamble. He never hesitated. They worked silently except when she explained something. He listened, asked questions. Made her laugh once when he tried to carry too many seed trays and tripped over a hose. They didn't talk about the kiss. But something shifted in the way she offered him her tools, in the way he handed her the scissors without her asking. In how they didn't need to speak to understand each other's rhythm. On Friday, he found her sitting on the steps with a box in her lap. "What's that?" he asked, brushing his hands on his jeans. "My grand's journals. She used to keep notes about everything she grew. I thought I'd lost them, but they were in the attic under a pile of yarn." He sat beside her. "Can I see?" She hesitated, then passed him a thin book with a cracked leather cover. He flipped it open, scanning through neat, looping handwriting. Notes about seed timing, frost warnings, and little musings in the margins. She wrote about the moon a lot, he said. She believed it affected how things grew, said some things bloom better under a waning moon. He looked up. What about people? Jessa didn't answer at first. Then people bloom when they're ready or not at all. That night he couldn't sleep. He paced the wooden floors of the estate's library, restless. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt empty, like something was missing. He walked outside under a half moon, crossed the field barefoot, and found Jessa on her porch, reading by lantern light. You ever miss her? He asked, sitting on the step below her. Every day. Do you think she'd like me? Jessa looked up. I think she'd ask why you're really here. I needed to start over. That's vague. He blew out a breath. I was about to lose my company, my father's legacy. I needed space to figure out who I was without it. And I'm not sure yet. She closed the journal. You could have gone anywhere. Why here? Because this place felt untouched by everything that broke me. She reached behind her and pulled out a second mug of tea. I made two, just in case. He took it without a word. They sat under the stars, the only sound the quiet chirp of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves. I'm not going to fall in love with someone who disappears the minute his world comes calling, she said suddenly. I'm not planning on disappearing. You say that now, but your kind always leaves. You'll get bored or restless or buy a vineyard in Tuscany. He took a long sip of tea. What if I don't want Tuscany? Then you better prove it. She stood, walked inside, and left the door open behind her. Orion didn't follow, not yet. The first time Orion saw Jessa with a paintbrush in her hand, her entire posture had shifted, her shoulders relaxed, her gaze far away but focused, like she was watching something only she could see. He hadn't meant to walk in on her. It was late afternoon, and her voice had carried through the open greenhouse window as she hummed a melody he'd never heard before. He followed it, expecting to find her tending to seedlings, but instead he found her in a small shed behind the garden, standing before a canvas propped on an easel, brush moving in slow, patient strokes. I didn't know you painted, he said, stepping just far enough inside that his shadow didn't fall across the work. She glanced back at him, not startled but mildly annoyed. You weren't supposed to. He leaned a shoulder against the doorway. I can go. You're here now. She dipped the brush into a jar of water and wiped it clean. It's not finished. He looked closer. The painting was abstract layers of ochre and rust, deep blues and streaks of charcoal. It didn't look like anything specific, but it felt like something fractured. Honest, it's beautiful, he said. It's not meant to be. She set the brush down and wiped her palms on her jeans. It's just for me. Is that why you keep it back here? I don't like explaining things I don't have words for. She turned to face him. Why are you really still here, Orion? I told you no, she said, cutting him off gently. You told me you're figuring things out, but you've been sleeping at that estate for weeks. You keep showing up at my door, and now you're standing in my painting shed. What are you hoping to find in all this? He didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened slightly as he looked past her, through the dusty pane of glass to the edge of the woods where the sun was beginning to lower. Peace, he said finally, not the kind that's bought or scheduled or managed. The kind that doesn't need to be earned. Her eyes softened. And are you finding it? I think I'm closer than I've ever been. Later that evening, she invited him to accompany her to a local harvest dinner in the neighboring village. He'd expected folding chairs and paper plates. What he found was a long wooden table under a canopy of string lights draped between maple trees, the scent of roasted squash and cinnamon hanging in the air. The townspeople greeted Jessa warmly, with familiarity that made Orion feel like a guest in a world she belonged to without question. He stood back, watching as she exchanged hugs, laughter, and stories with people he knew she'd grown up around. She was different here, more open, quicker to smile, less guarded. A woman in her 60s, with silver braids and a woven shawl, stepped beside him. You're the one who's been renting the Langston estate. I am, he said, turning toward her. You're the first one who's ever lasted longer than a week up there, he chuckled. Is that a record in this town? Yes. She looked at him, her gaze unnervingly direct. Jessa doesn't bring people here, not even when she was with Mark. Orion's expression shifted. Mark, the woman raised a brow. Didn't she tell you, high school sweetheart, they were together for years? He left for California, promised he'd send for her. Never did. Orion stared at the flickering candles along the table. She never mentioned him. She wouldn't, the woman said, matter of fact. But she changed after that, quit painting for a long time, started keeping to herself. So if she's letting you in even a little, don't mess it up. The warning wasn't harsh, it was protective. He nodded slowly. I won't. When Jessa returned to his side, she handed him a plate filled with roasted vegetables, a slice of cornbread, and something that looked suspiciously like apple cobbler. I hope you're not allergic to cinnamon, she said, nudging his elbow. I'm not, he said, watching the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled. She led him to a bench near the edge of the clearing, away from the noise and light, where the woods loomed dark and quiet. You didn't have to come, she said, voice low. I wanted to. I wasn't sure you'd fit in here, he looked around. Maybe I don't, but I'm not trying to belong to everyone, just to you. She didn't say anything. Just looked at him for a long moment, then reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. The silence between them shifted. Not empty now, but full. That night, after he walked her to the cottage and stood on her porch beneath the waning moon, she kissed him again. Slower this time, intentional. A question and then an answer. Inside, she lit a single candle and led him to her studio, where the half-finished painting waited. I want to show you something, she said. He watched as she pulled a second canvas from behind the easel. This one was different. A landscape, her garden under fog, the outline of the cottage, and in the distance, the faint figure of a man standing still among the trees. He stepped closer. That's me, she nodded. You painted me before I ever touched a trowel. I paint what I feel, she said. And what did you feel? He asked. That you were searching for something you didn't know how to name. He reached for her hand again. Do you think I've found it? You'll know when you stop looking. Days passed. The leaves began to fall in earnest. The air turned crisp enough for frost to skirt the edges of her greenhouse windows each morning. Orion stayed. He didn't talk about his business. He didn't check his phone. He didn't think about the board or the investors or the city that used to be his orbit. He thought about her. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. The way she whispered to her plants like they were old friends. The way she always made just enough food for two, but peace was not the same as permanence. One afternoon, while he was carrying a crate of dried herbs from the greenhouse to her kitchen, a car pulled into the drive, black sedan. Tinted windows, Jessa's posture stiffened instantly. Orion set the crate down as a man in a navy suit stepped out, scanning the property before his eyes landed on Orion. Mr. Langston, the man called. Jessa turned to him, arms crossing over her chest. You didn't tell me people would come looking. I didn't think they would, Orion said tightly. The man approached, holding a folder. Apologies for the intrusion. The board's called an emergency session. There's been movement on the acquisition. They need you back in the city. I told them I was on leave, Orion said. You told them you were taking time. You didn't say you were disappearing. The man looked pointedly at Jessa. Something in Orion's chest twisted. Jessa didn't say a word. Just turned, walked into the cottage, and shut the door behind her. Orion didn't follow, not yet. Orion stood in the fading light, the sound of that car's engine already swallowed by the trees. The silence that followed felt different than before, not peaceful, not quiet, hollow. He didn't go after her that night. Instead, he returned to the estate and sat in the room he hadn't entered since the day he arrived, the old sunroom that overlooked the back fields. Dust clung to the window panes. A single chair sat in the middle, facing east, as if waiting for the morning. He stayed there until the stars vanished and the horizon turned gold. By the time he returned to the cottage, the greenhouse door was closed, the shutters latched. He knocked once. No answer, not even the faint sound of movement inside. He didn't knock again. Instead, he walked to the nearest hilltop and pulled out the phone he hadn't used in weeks. There were over 200 unread messages. He deleted all of them except one. The name on the screen read, Thomas Langston, board chair. Orion called. I'll be back in 48 hours, he said as soon as the line picked up. But I'm not staying. There was silence on the other end, then a low, "You sure about that?" "I'm not walking away from the company," Orion said. "But if I come in, it's on my terms. I'll sign the proposals, clean up the deal, and name someone else to run it." "You built this." "I rebuilt it," Orion corrected. "But I don't want it to own me, not anymore." He hung up before his uncle could respond. He spent the next 2 days in the city. The boardroom was colder than he remembered. The skyline didn't stir his blood the way it once had. He signed papers, delivered a speech that made the shareholders happy, and handed over the reins to his most trusted partner without a flicker of hesitation. When he returned to Vermont, the late autumn air was sharper. The trees had shed most of their leaves. The garden was beginning to sleep. Jessa wasn't outside. He approached the cottage slowly, half expecting the door to be locked. It wasn't. She was inside, sitting cross-legged on the floor of her studio, surrounded by open cans of paint and blank canvases. She didn't look up when he walked in. "I wasn't sure if you'd come back," she said. "I wasn't sure you'd want me to." She dipped her brush into a fresh color, dragging it across the canvas with precise control. "You left without a word. I needed to make sure I wasn't still choosing that world over you." The brush paused in midair. He stepped closer but didn't reach for her. "I needed to walk in there and realize I didn't belong anymore, not because I failed, but because I outgrew it." She set the brush down and looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I'm not asking you to trust me yet," he said. "I know I didn't handle it the way I should have, but I'm here now. I'm not going back." I handed over the company. "I'm staying in Vermont." Her brow knit slightly. "You're giving up your entire legacy." "I'm not giving it up. I'm changing the shape of it. I want to build something that feels like mine, something quieter, slower. Something that starts with you." Jessa stood, wiping her hands on a rag. "You don't even know what that life looks like." "Then show me," he said. "Teach me how to build something that doesn't need a boardroom." She hesitated, then reached for the chain around her neck and pulled out a small key. She held it out to him. "This unlocks the shed behind the greenhouse," she said. "There's a kiln in there. My gran used to make pottery. I haven't touched it in years." He took the key gently. "You want me to try? I want to see if you're serious about creating something with your hands. Not just saying the right words." He nodded once. "Then I'll start today." He did. The first pot he tried to shape collapsed on itself. The second cracked in the kiln. The third turned out lopsided, but when he brought it to her, she ran her fingers along the edge and said, "It has character." They fell into a rhythm again, but it was different this time. There were no more unspoken questions. No lingering doubts. He helped her prepare for the winter market in town. Together, they built a simple wooden stall. He painted the sign himself. It said Vance and Wild because she insisted her last name came first, and he didn't argue. He learned how to identify which herbs dried best for sachets and which held their scent longest in soaps. He started waking up before sunrise, just to walk the woods before the day began. And one morning, he found her waiting for him on the porch with a letter in her hand. "I got accepted," she said, his stomach twisted. "Accepted where?" "A grant for a residency in Ireland, 3 months, just me, a studio and time to paint." He tried to keep his voice steady. "That's incredible." "I applied before you showed up," she said. "Back when I wasn't sure I'd ever paint again." He nodded. "You should go." She stared at him for a long beat. "You don't want me to stay." "I want you to go," he said quietly. "Because you want to, and I'll be here when you get back." She stepped closer. "What if I don't come back?" "Then I'll follow you," he said. "But I hope you do, because this place has never felt more like home." She kissed him then, fiercely, like she was anchoring herself to the ground. "I'll only be gone 3 months," she whispered against his mouth. "Then I'll count the days," he said. The morning she left, he drove her to the airport. She wore a wool coat and carried a single canvas bag, no suitcase. "Paint something wild," he told her. She nodded. "And you?" "What will you do while I'm gone?" "I'm going to finish building the pottery studio and plant garlic, and maybe finally convince the town council to let me sponsor a community greenhouse." She smiled as the boarding call echoed overhead. "You're really not going back, are you?" "I already left," he said. "I'm just finally where I'm supposed to be." 3 months later, she returned on the first day of spring. He met her at the airport with a bouquet of dried lavender from her own garden and a ring tucked in his pocket. He'd carved the band from local wood, inlaid with a single sapphire the color of the sky over the cottage. She didn't wait for him to kneel. "I missed you," she said. "I missed us," he replied. She looked at him for a long moment, then whispered, "Ask me." He did, under a canopy of blooming apple trees with the cottage behind them and the garden just beginning to wake. She said yes, and neither of them ever left again. Jessa stepped into the pottery studio just after dawn, the air still touched with the cool sting of early spring. The floor was swept, the shelves lined with carefully shaped bowls and vases, each in a different stage of completion. Orion stood at the wheel, sleeves rolled to his elbows, his hands coaxing life from a lump of clay. "You're getting better," she said, leaning against the door frame. He didn't look up. "You say that every time, because it's true every time." He looked over at her then, eyes catching on the edges of her travel-worn sweater, her cheeks still flushed from the morning air. "You're not going to take over, are you? That depends." "Are you still insisting on glazing everything in forest green?" He grinned. "It's the only color I haven't ruined." She walked to the work table, where a small stack of dried herbs and petals sat beside a box of beeswax. "I brought something back. There's a lavender varietal I found in County Kerry. It's sweeter, less medicinal. I thought it might work in the soaps." He wiped his hands on a cloth and came to stand beside her. "You brought back more than lavender. That sketchbook you were hiding in your bag, I saw it." Her chin lifted. "You went through my things?" "No," he said. "You left it on the bench yesterday. I peeked. I couldn't help it." She didn't scold him. Instead, she opened the box and revealed the worn leather-bound book. The pages were filled with charcoal drawings of landscapes, of faces, of a cottage under a heavy moon, and one unmistakable sketch of him, leaning over the pottery wheel, completely lost in his work. "You didn't tell me you'd been sketching me." "I wanted to remember what it looked like when something unfamiliar becomes home." Orion reached across the table and touched her hand, his thumb brushing the inside of her wrist. "You never told me what you saw when you looked at me then." "I saw someone trying not to fall." He leaned closer. "Did I?" "You did," she said softly, "and you landed right here." They spent the rest of the morning in a quiet rhythm. She blended oils while he trimmed the hardened clay. At noon, they walked into town for the spring market, not as strangers or guests, but as part of the fabric of the place. People waved. Some stopped to ask about their new greenhouse project near the elementary school, an idea Orion had pitched during the winter. At the market, their stall now bore a wooden sign carved by hand, Vance and Langston. Below it, soaps, candles, and pottery sat in careful rows. A woman with 2 young children lingered at the display, picking up a small vase. "Did you make this?" she asked Orion. He nodded. "It's one of mine." The woman smiled. "It feels solid, like it belongs somewhere already." Jessa's gaze flicked toward him, and he caught it. Later, on the walk back, she nudged his arm with her shoulder. "You're not going to get a big head about that compliment, are you?" He wrapped an arm around her waist. "Too late. I'm already planning a whole line of solid vases." The rest of the day passed with the scent of lemon balm and cedar wafting from the kitchen, where Jessa experimented with a new candle blend. Orion cleaned the kiln, humming under his breath. It was the kind of day that passed unnoticed, not for lack of magic, but because it felt like the kind of life they were meant to live every day. That night, as they sat on the porch beneath the stars, Orion reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. He handed it to her silently. She opened it. It was a drawing charcoal on parchment, just 3 lines. A cottage, a garden, and 2 chairs beneath an apple tree. "You drew this?" she asked, stunned. "I tried," he said. "It's not what you'd call museum-worthy. It's perfect." He turned toward her. "I wanted to ask you something," she smiled. "You already did." "This is different." He stood, reached into his other pocket, and pulled out a small box. It wasn't the ring he'd proposed with before. This one was simply a band of brushed gold, unadorned. "I know we said we'd wait," he said, "but I don't want to wait anymore. I don't want a wedding with 500 people and a champagne tower. I want something that feels like us, something real." She stood with him, eyes full. Then let's do it, she said. Tomorrow, under the tree. And they did. Just after sunrise, with dew still clinging to the grass, they stood beneath the apple tree in her grandmother's garden. A few close friends from the town gathered, Tom included, who handed Orion a carved wooden box with a nod of approval. Jessa wore a linen dress she'd dyed with marigold petals. Orion wore his boots and a linen shirt rolled at the sleeves. They exchanged vows written on scraps of paper. No grand pronouncements, no orchestras, just hands clasped, eyes locked, and a promise neither of them needed to rehearse. Afterward, they shared fresh bread, honey, and tea with everyone who came. The town's florist brought wildflowers, someone brought a fiddle, someone else played a harmonica. Children ran barefoot through the grass, and when the sun dipped low, Orion pulled Jessa close and whispered into her ear. The city never felt like this. She rested her head against his chest. That's because this isn't something you chase. It's something you grow. That evening, after the guests had gone and the candles flickered low, he carried her across the threshold of the cottage, not into a hotel, not into a penthouse, but into their home. In the weeks that followed, the garden bloomed in bursts of color. The greenhouse expansion began. Jessa's paintings sold at the regional art fair. Orion started teaching a pottery class at the community center, where the kids called him Mr. O. Every morning, they woke up tangled in each other. Every night, they fell asleep with the windows open and the scent of lavender drifting in. And when summer came and the first tomatoes ripened on the vine, Jessa painted a new canvas. It wasn't abstract. It was a portrait of a man standing barefoot in the soil, clay on his hands, smiling like he'd finally found the place he belonged. She titled it, Bloom. And he kept it hanging in their kitchen, right above the kettle, as a reminder that love didn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it grew quietly and stayed, always.